Hi everyone, welcome back to Coffee, Books, and Rain, where we have got coffee, we have books slash reviews, and we don't have rain, but maybe this evening we'll have a little bit more. We had some last night, which was kind of intense, so I could always use a little bit more this evening. Today, we are reading a book or reviewing a book called The Samurai of the Red Carnation by Denis Theriault, and I think that's right. I could be pronouncing it wrong. It looks French, and even though I do Duolingo on Duolingo and the French, still people's names is very specific, usually to families and their pronunciations. So I do apologize if I'm getting that really wrong. So let's dive into what was a very interesting book in my personal opinion. Now I do see that this was originally published in French. At least that's what it looks like. And it's been translated by Louise Rogers Lalaurie. So there we go. I was not expecting that. So this is my first time looking at the Goodreads for it, and I did not realize that this was a French translated book, especially with the context of it. The content is about a Japanese samurai, so very interesting. Matsuo is born to be a samurai, but he is being trained in the art of war. As he is being trained in the art of war, I apologize, he realizes he was meant for a different art altogether. Turning his back on his future as a warrior of the sword, he decides instead to do battle with words as a poet. Thus begins a story of romance and adventure, love and betrayal that takes Matsuo across medieval Japan through bloody battlefields and burning cities, culminating in his ultimate test at the Uta Awase. I'm not sure. I hope I pronounced that correctly as well. Japanese is also not a language that I am fluent in of any kind, where Japan's greatest poets engage in their fierce verbal combat for the honor of victory. Now, I'm going to start right here by saying, even though Matsuo is born to be a samurai, it says, but he's being trained in the art of war. Okay, Matsuo, as a child, loved poetry and traded tanka. And from what I'm to understand, a tanka is a form of Japanese-style poetry, where haiku is a 575, usually three-lined poem, usually unrhyming from what I'm to understand, but usually 3 lines, 5 syllables, 575, and a tanka, which is what Matsuo tends to create his poetry in, is 57577. So it's a 5-lined poem with 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, continuing for those 5 lines. When he was a child, he traded tanka with his mother. So, from a very early age, Matsuo is a fan already of poetry. So I don't really like the way this summary is written, because it seems as though while he's being trained for war, he realizes he was meant for a different art altogether, and that is incorrect. That is a poorly written summary. And I hate to say that, but the story was pretty well done. So Matsuo, his father was I think it's a bushi, a Bushi, and I couldn't probably Google it, but I don't want to Google that right now in front of you all, but has his armor, so I would assume a samurai type warrior. I don't know if that means Bushido or Bushi, but his father was a renowned warrior who ultimately does die or fall in battle. Now, Matsuo, though he has this intense love for this poetry, especially the tanka style, he is sent to follow in his father's footsteps and sent to the training. This is just how it's done at that time. And while he's there, he starts off not doing great. Why? He's just not interested in it. However, he kind of gets pulled aside by one particular individual who shows him a book of Tonka, and it seems as though the book of Tonka was written by perhaps another Bushi warrior. And this poetry is very much Tonka style, and I think quite a few of them are the Tonka. However, he sees the correlation between the structure of the poetry and the beauty and grace of it, as well as his training. So where he goes from kind of mediocre at best trainee, he takes that to heart. He takes this book of poetry to heart, and he becomes an incredible version of himself. Still holding poetry very dear to himself, still holding that grace and dignity very close to himself, and using what he's kind of learned through poetry to even enhance his warrior skills. So that's why I kind of argue a little bit with the way the summary is written, because it says he turns his back on his future as a warrior of the sword. In a way, yes, because he finds that that is not his calling. Well, and the reason is, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you the reason, just so it makes sense, is when he is asleep one night at his training school, he hears his mother's voice and pretty much calling out to him, asking where he is. So I think he wakes up, realizes he got that his there's a message for him, and his father has passed. So immediately he starts heading home, and I guess it takes a little bit to get home. By the time he gets there, his mother has also passed. It sounds as though potentially from a broken heart. So he is now gutted. He has lost his mother, who was his muse, and his father, who was kind of pretty much like his idol. So he knows of this witch woman out in the woods, and he goes to her, and she knows of a potion that she can make that helps him kind of have a bit of a trip. So he does that, and what he sees is his mother telling him to follow the path of the red carnation. And in that dream, he realizes that that's probably the best idea for him. He does not the sword is not his most powerful weapon in his arsenal, I guess, in his personal thoughts. So he just decides to be, I guess, more poetic. So he goes on the road. He ends up running across a guy who kind of becomes his mentor, but this mentor kind of sucks. So I don't know. I was kind of disappointed by this mentor, and anyway, Matsuo continuing to follow him after finding out how his lavacious lifestyle. I know that gave me a dry spot in my throat. Now, this book has a lot of references. Actually, it has a lot of Tonka written, so that was pretty clever. I do believe the writer of this particular book must have spent so much time writing those Tonka. And I do think by the end of the story, we get just a brief glimpse into what the author, what their inspiration was, if I read it correctly. So I actually, I usually read things through my NetGalley, through my NetGalley account. This one I actually had to do through my Kindle, just simply because it had, it actually had expired well in the past. So by the time that I went to, pull it up to start reading it, it was still in my Kindle, which was great. Now, I think it was about chapter 36, and I'm pulling it up just right here. We kind of get a glimpse into the idea that the events are inspired and the life that is depicted is inspired by a warrior who, I guess, seemed to bear this red armor. His warrior name, the Samurai of the Red Carnation, for the flower painted on his banner, and axe to the top of his helmet, for the bright scarlet of his armor. So it seems as though this particular story potentially was inspired by a real samurai. Now, again, I don't really know for sure, because I am taking the story as historical fiction, but that would be a really clever inspiration and a really powerful inspiration as well. Because when supposedly this samurai fell, it says his corpse bore no clue as to his true identity other than a bundle of poems tied with a red ribbon concealed beneath his famous red armor. Historians specializing in the Heian period dispute Red Carnation's reported death in combat, citing other sources which record his retirement from active service. Again, I'm not really sure. They also credit him as the author of a philosophical treatise on the art of war and poetry entitled Swirling Like Water. So I thought that was very interesting. And it was published with the support of a grant from the Council des Arts du Canada. So apparently that was pretty cool as well. It sounds as though it was inspired by something. Now, the story itself does read more like an outsider watching Matsuo do things. The story does tell, it doesn't show. And I know a lot of authors are very much more into, you need to show us, don't tell us. This is a very much, we are telling you what is happening instead of showing you what is happening. They did not leave a lot to the imagination for the reader to have these, like, it is like... And again, I'm not mad about this because of the style it's in, which is a very poetic prose style. And it is, again, almost like a historian telling the story of this particular person. Now, could it have been more in a storytelling? Perhaps. I don't know. I just feel like some of the little vignettes were clunky, but not bad. And so in my personal thoughts, I probably will give this about 4 stars. Now, it says it's 288 pages, and it was originally published, supposedly, July 4th of 2024. Now, I think my notes that I have is that this is going to release in English, potentially, in 2025 for the English edition, this is the paperback edition. The paperback edition will publish in 2025. The original, it looks like, the non-translated was about 2022. So, if you want a story that feels as though it is poetic prose about a samurai and more or less his life, kind of from beginning to almost end, with his loves, his losses, poetry in the tanka form, a kind of crappy mentor, and not as much action as I thought. Because he doesn't really, like, the only time he really goes into battle is when he kind of signs up, not intentionally, with some bandits. So, and then he does fall in love with a couple people throughout the book, or at least he crushes kind of hard on a couple people throughout the book. Again, he's a little, I wouldn't say he's like a bit of a soft heart person, but I think poetry can inspire people to kind of be more amorous in their love towards people. I don't know. But I liked being kind of in medieval Japan. I thought learning about, like, the warriors and the humanity behind them, because I don't know, and I guess I could do more research on it. I've never done research on the samurai and, like, the lives behind them. I just know that they are so incredibly cool, and they're depicted in, like, movies like The Last Samurai and stuff in a very hardcore badass way. So just very, very interesting, and I think it was really well done. Rich in that poetry form, which I enjoy. Poetry is one of my favorites, so I was perfectly fine with the prose of the way this reads, very lyrically. There are moments where it feels a little disconnected and disjointed. I'm not sure if that's intentional or if it's just me losing focus for like a few minutes, or like forgetting that I read a page, not really sure. But with all of that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead, leave it here. Won't tell you the ending, but let's just say it starts from the beginning of his life, kind of when he's a young boy, and we go pretty far into it. Again, the final chapter, it looks like chapter 36, gives us the briefest nod towards maybe where the inspiration came from, and potentially that could be researched further if you're interested. But I do want to thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I just lost my train of thought. Have a great one, and I will see you guys on the next page.